Thank you, Anne, and thank you for all you do in enabling us to pursue experiments in teaching and learning in this new world. One way of describing the big experiment that beckons is to see to what extent it's possible to take the distance out of distance learning. When we first began planning for the project that Anne just described, filming the justice course that took place here for many years and making it available, first we thought, this shows you how long ago it was. Well, public television, a lot of people will watch it on public television. And then they said we should have a website too. And the website was an afterthought. It occupied just a tiny fraction of the budget, and we almost thought, well, can't we use that money better elsewhere? We never would have dreamt at the response online. This was before the word MOOC was invented, before edX, and we were astonished to find that people, by the tens of millions, wanted to watch lectures about philosophy. Part of what attracted them, though, was the fact that here in Sanders Theater, and maybe we hope also in the places where they watched, people didn't just listen. They argued with one another. Here in Sanders Theater, the students argue back with me, with the philosophers they're reading. And so when it became clear that people around the world were interested in reasoning together, arguing together about big moral and civic questions, I wanted to try to push the experiment further so that instead of just putting out stuff, lectures, debates for people to watch, we could enable people to argue back across nations and cultures and distances. And that is a technological challenge, a pedagogical challenge, technological challenge, and also, I think, one of the biggest civic challenges of our day. And so I've done, with the help of some very creative IT people, a number of experiments in seeing whether it's possible, to what extent it's possible, to replicate the arguing and the reasoning and the debating that goes on in this intimate place to a global online setting. With the help of a startup in San Francisco, some years ago, we did an experiment right here with the class where we were able to link, using an iPad technology, iPad-based software, to link, and we could see, to classrooms in India, Japan, China, and Brazil. So we had 5 classrooms in 5 countries linked in real time who could see and hear one another. It worked pretty well, but it was cumbersome to arrange, and it was not the kind of thing we could do every day. Another experiment I did, a series of programs with NHK, Japan's national television system, where we linked groups of students from China, the US, and Japan for a series of discussions on big ethical and political questions. They could see and hear one another on the screens. I would stand in a studio surrounded by these screens. But now I've been engaged in a third such experiment, and I want to get your thoughts about it. Working with the BBC, a series called The Global Philosopher, we've partnered with, they've actually rented the studio at WGBH that HBX, the Harvard Business School online project, has created, where we have a wall of monitors, 60 monitors. Some of you may have seen this studio. And they use it for a kind of classroom, distant classroom setting and teaching. We used it to create BBC programs taking up hard questions, ethical questions, controversies, lying behind the headlines, where we can bring people together using this studio from, we've had roughly each time about 40 countries around the world represented on this wall of 60 monitors, including from Europe, Africa, Latin America, Asia, North America, for debate about these questions. I'd like to show you what it looks like and how it sounds. It's from a program we did recently on free speech. And the clip I'm going to show you is a debate about free speech and hate speech, whether there should be laws restricting hate speech. We had participants from places such as Russia and Iran and China, as well as a great many European and Latin American and some African countries, debating this question. Now, we've gotten pretty far, though I think there is room for improvement. So after I show you this clip from the global philosopher, I would like to invite you to respond, to give me your impression, partly because I'd like to get some free professional advice on how we can improve this. But so I want to hear your thoughts as IT professionals, but also as citizens and as viewers, what you make of this, how the experiment could be improved. So let's have a look at that clip, if we could, and maybe if we could dim the stage lights. In the Netherlands, Emma.
Coming from a country that is supposed to be very tolerant in freedom of speech, I think it's important that people are allowed to express their opinions so we can maintain a dialogue. And I can become very hypocrite in a country that there's a lot of things going on without anybody knowing about it, and it's better to open it up to have and maintain a dialogue.
All right, let's bring back Frankie in Vancouver, Canada. What do you say to Emma?
Emma said to express opinions and create dialogue, but that's not what hate speech does. When we're talking about things such as degrading people with certain sexualities, degrading people of certain races, degrading people of certain heights, as someone said earlier, that is not helping political discourse. That is not grasping at an opinion. That is blatant disrespect, and it harms people.
Emma?
I can understand what you're saying, but I think I'm afraid that the people that think that way and aren't allowed to express it, that they will express it in other things than words.
You're afraid of driving the hatred underground by banning its public expression. Is that it, Emma?
Yeah, I can see you can compare it to, for example, not legalizing drugs or not legalizing being from another sexuality, that people will always maintain those kinds of feelings or thoughts, and they will express them otherwise.
In Croatia, Martina.
Yes, I think that freedom of speech is completely opposite to hate speech, because hate speech often leads to violence toward exactly those people you are speaking against. So it's not only the problem of speaking against them. Hate speech really brings to violent acts.
Okay, now Martina has introduced another consideration here, that hate speech may lead to violent acts. Emma has been opposing the hate speech laws. Is there someone else who opposes hate speech laws who would like to reply to Martina's argument that if you allow hate speech, it may lead to violence against vulnerable groups? In Seoul, South Korea, Juan.
that speeches can incite violence, and I perfectly understand why people want to ban hate speeches, but I'm against outlawing hate speech. So I want to propose different kind of limitations where the victims, if they feel threatened, they can ask the government to protect them and not preemptively banning such speeches from being made in the first place.
So people can get protection, let people engage in hate speech, but protect the potential victims.
Yes, that's what I want to propose, different kind of limitations.
What about that? In Mogadishu, Mariam.
Hi. I actually want to argue that hate speech is a kind of violence. As someone who's had to endure hate speech, it's something that undermines your humanity. If it's attacking you based on things that you can't change and things that are maybe irrelevant to a discourse. For instance, I mean, as a student, I know that there's a lot of discussions around safe spaces and what should be allowed to be said in a classroom, because when you have a diverse group of students and some are being oppressed because of what some others are trying to say, you create this hostile environment where it's not an equal learning the opportunity to learn is not equal across the board.
All right, Marion, you said something interesting when you said that hate speech undermines the humanity of the person being targeted. And this brings out two different kinds of arguments, two different objections to hate speech that have been running through this discussion. Some of the arguments for banning hate speech worry that hate speech will lead to violent acts. But Marion raised a different kind of argument, which is the speech itself undermines humanity or expresses disrespect and inflicts, I suppose you could say, a kind of harm in and of itself, intrinsically, whether or not you could show evidence that hate speech actually leads to violent acts against those being targeted. What about that, Kyung-hee?
Well, I believe that Copernicus gave offense to religion and science by challenging the position of the sun in the earth. Martin Luther King gave offense to U.S. society and norms by challenging racism. And women are giving offense to a male-dominating society by challenging inequality. And when you say protection, you assume that the people are weak and cannot defend themselves. But shielding women from misogyny or shielding ethnic minorities from racism, isn't that paternalistic rather than being progressive?
All right, let's bring Frankie in Vancouver back to the screen to reply to Kyung-hee.
I'm absolutely shocked because I feel that academic discussion gets in the way of reality and truth. And if Marion is on a subway in Somalia and someone shouts at her for the head garment that she is wearing, that is not helpful, Kyung from South Korea. That is not leading to her to feel empowered. That is not discourse. That is hate speech, and that is disgusting. Do not say what Martin Luther King said when he was protesting for his rights was hate speech, because what we are discussing is if a person should be able to degrade someone on their ethnicity, on their sexuality, on the way that they look. And I believe that what Marion chooses to wear because of the color of her skin should never be a reason to put hate speech against her.
Kyung-hee.
But I believe that offensive speech can only be defeated by more free speech, not limiting offensive speech. Therefore, free speech should not be limited, but rather expanded.
Marion.
I think we're confusing being offensive and hate speech with just being disruptive. If you have a controversial idea, but you substantiate it really well, that doesn't make it hate speech, and that isn't something that we're arguing about being banned. But when someone's being attacked on the basis of something they can't change and it's not contributing to a dialogue or actually furthering anything, then that in itself is damaging and hate speech.
Okay, I deliberately showed you an extended clip because beyond showing what it looks like and the cool screen with 60 people, I wanted to see in part whether you think that the main goal is achieved. The main goal is to actually develop a line of argument, a line of debate where people are not just giving their opinions randomly, but listening and responding or trying to respond to the arguments and whether there's a certain argument that emerges. And I should add, and here I would like now to open the floor to comments, responses, suggestions, criticisms, how we could do it better, how the technology might enable us to do it better, or I would just add one other feature of this is, in addition to the 60 participants who are on the video monitor, and they can see one another and hear one another as well as seeing me and hearing me. There are people who join in online, who can watch it, and who can text in or email, I'm not sure how it works, comments that periodically are gathered and culled and fed into the discussion by a BBC producer who occupies one of those video screens. So in principle, an unlimited number of people could be watching even though they couldn't all be on the screen. So I'd like briefly to open the floor to see whether people have reactions, suggestions, questions. Yes. And first, if you could identify yourself.
Hi, I'm Peter Brown, IT manager in the economics department.
Yeah.
It just struck me that really and I don't think you mentioned it, it seemed like one of the most powerful elements of what we just witnessed was the fact that there was a very powerful moderator at work, which was you, essentially. So in terms of democratic debate, if you use Facebook or any other sort of online method for debating things, the reason that so much debate deteriorates so rapidly is exactly because there is no moderator.
Thank you for that. I mean, it is true, whether it's me or some other moderator, it has to be, I think, public discourse. We're trying to find ways of using technology to create platforms for global public discourse. That's the big aim that interests me. And I think there is no way of doing it. I agree with Peter. There's no way of doing it just running on its own. It does require, however good the technology, it requires some structure, or it might have to be a person. I don't think it can be an algorithmically driven one, but maybe you'll tell me otherwise, to guide the discussion and give it shape and juxtapose views and so on. Thank you for that. Other thoughts? Yes. Here, we'll get you a microphone. And if you could identify yourself, please.
My name is Maureen. I work in central administration.
Yes.
And as cool as that venue was,
yeah,
with all of those monitors, it looked like it might be pretty stressful to be the person up front trying to keep track of what the technology is doing and what the people on all of the 60 screens were doing. And I wonder whether video helps or hurts the progression of the conversation and the content of the debate and the conversation.
Right, that's a great, what's your name again?
Maureen.
Maureen, it's a great question. Whether video helps or hurts, you're suggesting maybe an audio version of this might be better. And, well, I'd be interested to hear whether other people have views about that. Does someone, about Maureen's question, which I think is a really interesting one. Yes? Sitting in the second row, sorry. Yes.
Hi, my name's Jean. I'm in the Administrative Technology group.
Yeah.
So I have a comment about what Maureen said, in that one of the daily struggles in IT, where we're working with a lot of people who are remote, whether in other buildings or
right.
vendors or so forth, is that audio technology for having conference calls and sort of things definitely has its downside, because
right.
you don't get any visual cues about who is about to speak or who wants to speak,
Right.
who's speaking, who's going to get talked over because they don't know someone else is going to engage at the same moment.
Right.
And that's a frustration and can make things very inefficient in the actual communication.
Right.
So from my perspective, having the visual cues is more helpful.
Good, thank you. And then just behind, there was someone who had, in the third row.
Yeah, my
Hello,
name is
Karen.
Pamela Needham. I'm in client services at the medical school. And I have a question about the visuals. What we were just presented, I assumed was a created video, but I may be wrong. Is what we saw exactly what all participants see when they are engaged in this, or did we see something slightly different?
What we saw was pretty much what the participants see themselves, because there is live mixing of the camera shots, which means that sometimes we can have two people juxtaposed on the screen, other times all four, other times one. So there is a live director mixing it so that the participants do see more or less what we saw. Then later, afterwards, the BBC does some post-production to fix things that weren't quite right, but it's basically what the participants see. And I don't want to lose track of the question about whether the video element helps or hurts the discussion. Is there someone, I have a thought about it, though I don't have a definitive answer. Is there someone else who would like to address that? Yes. Stand up, and we'll get you a microphone. First, if you could identify yourself. And then.
I'm Chris Barnhart. I work at the Extension School in digital teaching and learning. So one of the things that we do is offer these online classes. And we've put a great deal of effort into being able to provide this kind of interface that provides the video so that the instructor can see the students can see each other. And it's precisely because we believe that these visual cues to discussion and to seeing each other's reactions to what is being said is so important to making a human connection and forming these communities and these learning communities. But what I'm struck by today in the context of the previous keynote is how our visual cues from each other influence our conversations in negative ways sometimes. And I'm remembering as my career has developed in technology, when I am online and when I'm in an online class, I sometimes find it an advantage that people cannot see me and cannot see that I am a woman, and that I have a fairly gender-neutral name, and people assume that I am a man. And I'm struck by the pains I sometimes go to when I'm on an online discussion board to actively disguise my gender.
Right, that's interesting. Well, I see the force of that. And I should add, by the way, that we made a version of Justice available through DCE, and I've just recently done, using the DCE technology, a version of this where we had, I think, on a screen a dozen people or 16 people at a time, a subset of the course, having this kind of discussion. So I think there are a number of versions of this technology that increasingly are available. There's a case for anonymity, blocking out prejudices. But there is also a case, I think, in teaching and learning and also in civic discourse, which is really what this project is aiming at, to seeing the person and knowing the person's name, in part because civic discourse at its best involves addressing people and their views and their opinions and their backgrounds, figuring out where they're coming from, cultivating the art of listening. But sometimes listening can be helped. It can be hurt and distorted by prejudice, but it can also be deepened and enriched by a kind of presence, a kind of human presence that's missing if there's anonymity. And I think one of the reasons that online discussion platforms so often descend into invective and obscenity and rude remarks, to go back to the earlier point, partly it's the lack of structured, directed moderation. And partly it's because anonymity can breed a kind of irresponsible stance where you don't really attend. There is a paradox in this. So I do think the image, the visual image, replicates to a degree the human presence that is important, I think, to civic dialogue. Back in ancient Greece in the ecclesia, the citizens were present to one another. Now, not all of them were present in the ecclesia. Women weren't, slaves weren't. But presence matters to teaching and learning and to civic dialogue, I think. But here's a paradox that I've noticed. In trying various of these technologies for this purpose, the visual element contributes presence, but even more important is the quality of the audio. And in particular, one feature that we sometimes take for granted, you know, there are, and you could tell me why or how it works, but there are certain forms of audio connections, and this I think is true on Skype, where if one person talks, the other person is cut off, that you can't interrupt and hear the interruption. One of the first things I learned doing the experiment back here in Sanders Theater with that iPad-based technology is that for this purpose, the ability to interrupt, though we think of interruption as rude, the ability to interrupt or to interject laughter or gasping or moaning, that is an important dimension of presence, the sound of it. And so the technologies, as this technology permits, that allow interruption actually make discussions go better rather than worse. Now, the interruption has to be contained and kept within bounds and so on. Laughter. Here's a technical thing that we wrestled with here. The engineers, because they're also producing a radio program out of this, they want to keep all of the dampers, the sound dampers, down until they get the person who's speaking. And I'm always negotiating, well, can't we keep them up a little bit? Because if this is to replicate presence, it's important to hear someone laugh or moan or groan or interrupt, or it makes a difference. So seeing is part of presence, the visual image, but the ability to interject or to interrupt and to hear that, and for the participants to hear that, is paradoxically maybe also an important part of it. I would like to shift the discussion to a different topic. Here you saw a debate about free speech and hate speech, using this distance, pretty sophisticated, but nonetheless distance technology that tries to replicate presence across cultural and national distances. And what it suggests is the technology at stake here, we're used to talking about IT, information technology. That's what the I stands for, right? And the I. But when we're thinking about teaching and learning and also about platforms for public discourse, it's not so much, maybe here's another way of putting it, the next frontier is not so much information technology, because it's not just about promulgating or publishing or broadcasting information, important though that is. It's also about enabling deliberation. So DT, maybe in 10 years from now, we'll have a DT summit, deliberative technology. That's what I would like to invite you to invent. A kind of deliberative technology that would enable the kind of public discourse and also the teaching and learning within one another's presence that we've been discussing just now. Now, I would like to put to you, maybe you'll consider it a far-out example of how deliberation and judgment are being replicated, or some would attempt to replicate these human faculties technologically in the age of apps and big data. Take this as a hypothetical. I just want to sort of take a survey of opinion, what you would think. There are dating apps. There are algorithmically driven apps that predict what movie you will like. Netflix has those. Or what book you would like, or what product will be just what you are looking for or would look for if it had occurred to you. Now suppose that these algorithms became so good, so accurate, that they could aggregate data about you, your personality, your character, your preferences, your desires, your life plans, and identify algorithmically from all the people in the world, let's say the 3 best life partners for you. Call it the marriage prediction app. Now, here's the question I'd just like to get your, off the top of your head, intuition. If there were such an app, and if it were very sophisticated, which would you trust more in deciding whom your life partner will be? The advice of the app or the advice of your parents? Let's just take a vote. How many would go for the app? Wow. And how many would go for their parents? Well, for an IT group, that's pretty impressive. Some of you are still holding out for your parents. All right, I want to show you. I put this question, I did a series of programs recently for Dutch public television where we were debating ethical questions, kind of like the Global Philosopher one, only unlike the BBC one, it was not with a high-tech studio. It was decidedly low-tech. We gathered 20, 22 young people in their 20s and 30s in an ancient Greek amphitheater to give it a Socratic flavor. And we discussed questions such as inequality, discrimination, privacy, and in one episode, AI and whether and how smart machines could be. So, well, let's take a quick look at how they discussed it and then see what you think. How many would say the marriage prediction app? How many would go with that?
It's because you said parents. If you said somebody else.
All right, that's the alternative.
Best friend would have been another story.
All right, and how many would go with their parents' advice? Well, a handful of people would still go with their parents. Asha, you say you go with the app.
Yes,
why is
because
that?
he knows every character, perspective of yourself.
Yeah.
He knows you well
Yes.
as you are.
Yes.
So I think he can search for a better match than my parents who would see me at home or when I'm visiting them. Even though they raised me up, there was a time that I left home and created my own life. There's a life at home and a life outside of home. So I don't think they are totally capable of searching somebody who fits me in both situations.
But the app doesn't have that gut feeling. And I want to connect with a woman on a spiritual level. And the app can't feel that. So we
Your parents do?
Trust me, my mama. My mama. Trust me. My mama knows these type of things. She knows me from the inside out. So if I come home with a girl, she would notice in like 2 seconds. No, this is not good for you.
But I think the question is, and being a mama boy as well, I think the question is there any space for a mistake? Even in choosing a partner to marry, is there any space for imperfection? Because this thing works very well. It's not the algorithms that we have now. It finds the exact perfect match. But don't we want to leave something out of that perfection for something as big as marriage?
Well, I don't know if you've ever been in a relationship, but if you have a perfect match, then the mistakes start happening, right? So I mean, so there's plenty of room for mistakes if you have a good connection.
And that's what I'm saying. Like I am married, and I don't know if a perfect robot would have found exactly my wife. She would have landed top 3.
But I think if it helps you find, this is going to sound very clinical, but a list of potential partners that have a good match, it helps it because it takes away a lot of the clutter of finding somebody who you have a good connection with.
Is that actual clutter, or that's part of what we call love dating?
But the very action of having an app do that for you. The perfect girl, the perfect boy, or whoever would be rendered imperfect based on the fact that there wasn't that human element of, oh, I'm in a bar and my hands are clammy, and the kind of the fluttering human experience of actually falling in love. Yeah. If you have an app provide you a perfect match, it's imperfect because you don't have the dance of falling in love.
There are apps out there that already work and where many people, you know, don't have this hesitation of dating and having clammy hands, just like picking somebody up from the bar. Same thing, just that the date was set up by Parship or whatnot. And there are people who are getting married already through that, you know.
What about the sexual part? How will the machine know if that's a click? I mean,
how will your parents know?
And that too can grow. That too will
No, but what I mean is there's got to be a personal connection, I guess, or some kind of thing, because the machine will never know. I mean,
well, we're presupposing that it does. So what they write about online dating now is that it actually doesn't matter as much if you like the same film. You need a physical connection, but we're presupposing, I think, that the app also connects you to people. But I think Sergio's question underlies, if you take away all the foraging and the searching, you take away a lot of human experience because you miss all the clammy mistakes and wrong dates and the wrong things. So I might have actually switched back to...
But there's something Sergio said, I don't know whether this app would have my partner in that top 3. So it makes me doubting right now whether I would go for that machine.
You're changing your mind.
I don't know. I'm really, because of his argument, because I'm thinking, I'm married. Would that machine pick this guy that I'm married to? I don't know.
Okay. So, did anybody change his or her mind based on... Seriously. One of the... part of what's moving, you know, there are amusing elements, but also moving when people are listening closely enough and thinking together with their interlocutors that they sometimes find themselves, we find ourselves, changing our minds, as was, we caught a glimpse of that here. Is there, well, one question to ask, looking at these two episodes of debate about a moral or civic question is whether the technology, the high-tech version in the first example, could, if perfected and improved in various ways, replicate the immediacy, the human presence of the moment of reasoning that we saw in the second case. What's your hunch? It's not anytime soon. And here, let's bring my microphone down here. Because what I want to, and what's your name?
Tracy.
And identify from where.
Tracy. I work in the library technology group here in
Yeah.
Hewitt.
Not anytime soon. And why is that, do you think, Tracy?
For a lot of the factors you already outlined, I think that the power of personal connection requires personal contact, and it's just hard for me to imagine technology being able to replicate that.
Yes.
My name is Amir Kargar. I work in HMS and research computing.
Yeah.
I think that if the real goal here is to get people connected enough they can change each other's minds.
Yes.
People have changed each other's minds through text messages, through emails, through letters for centuries. And
text
so I
messages.
think that
message. You've had a sufficiently persuasive text message that it's changed your mind? Wait. Keep the microphone there. That was not a rhetorical.
I've had some very long text messages go back and forth, so I think I have, yeah. But again, it's about creating that connection. So having the moderated conversation helps, but it all depends on getting the right group of people together and getting them the right sort of interaction that they can, speak to each other respectfully and be willing to change minds and learn together, as you said.
Good. All right. Well, thank you for that. Time for one more. Yes. Go ahead.
Yes. Hello. My name is Ramon de la Cruz from Harvard School of Public Health.
Yes.
I would like to say that the two topics were a little bit different, in my opinion. The dating app versus the parents is something, I'm already married. I'll give my opinion.
Right.
After that conversation, I go on with my life. I would probably never talk about it. But, the racial conversation is something that I hold dear.
Right.
Emotions come into place. I'm short. So somebody making fun of my shortness is something deep into me. So I think on the second conversation, people stay on track on what they were talking about.
Yes.
On the first one, people went, whether I should you ban it? Should it's okay to say it?
Right.
Is it gonna cause violence?
Right. The hate speech.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I will say the topics were a little bit different.
Right, so they're not strictly comparable.
Yes, and it's the second topic, maybe not too much in the emotional level, was more logical.
I see.
Yeah,
well, it's interesting.
Changing minds is a little bit easier on the second topic, I would say.
It's interesting that you say that the free speech, hate speech debate was more passionate and emotional, whereas whether a machine could tell you whom to marry, that's just an academic topic. I think there might be a division of opinion on that question, but I think you raise an important point that it's hard strictly to compare these as examples of debate, reasoned argument, dialogue, deliberation, not only because the mediation of technology distinguishes them, but also because the subject matter does, and of course the participants as well. When I first began this series of experiments in using technology to open access to the Harvard classroom, the main goal back then was to show that higher education could be a public good, not just a private privilege. That's what animated, for me, the first experiment, putting the justice course online. But because of its subject matter, which goes right to the heart of our civic life, and because of the growing importance of learning from one another and reasoning together across cultures and national boundaries, the second aspect of the project, using technology to create global platforms for public discourse, seemed to me, well, the next frontier. We've learned a lot about teaching and learning through the use of technology, and also about the dangers and the possibilities that the internet and social media pose for public discourse. For the most part, the record to date in the world at large is not very good. Not very good. For the most part, social media and the internet have contributed to the general debasement, I would say, of public discourse. And yet, it's a tremendous potential resource if we can figure out how to use it. And so that's a project where we together, those of us interested in promoting public discourse, those of us involved in teaching in the classrooms, need to work together and learn from those of you who have already carried us a long way toward exploring these possibilities. The challenge as we continue this work together, and the challenge, the invitation I would put to you, is to see whether we can, in the coming years, working creatively together, make of social media and the internet platforms of genuine listening and learning and arguing and reasoning together rather than shouting at one another. In short, to convert IT to DT, information technology, to deliberative technology. Thank you all very much.